Just hours before the Conservative conference begins in Manchester, there is public disagreement between senior party members about the future of HS2. Today, Theresa May became the latest former Conservative Prime Minister to call for the railway scheme not to be scaled back. Rishi Sunak is expected to give his decision on the railway during the conference. With us to discuss the future of HS2, Professor Tony Travers, former member of the HS2 Oakervee review panel, and Greg Smith, Conservative MP for Buckingham. He's opposed to the line which is due to pass through his constituency. Very good evening, gentlemen. Thanks for your time. Greg Smith, perhaps we can start with you first of all. This is going to loom large, isn't it, over Conservative Party conference in Manchester, of course, of all places. Weren't we meant to get an announcement about this earlier in the week? Has the Prime Minister bottled it, or has he seen sense?
I don't know. I hope he's going to see sense and not just cancel HS2 north of Birmingham, but cancel the whole lot, because there's a reality. We can't afford it. The costs have ballooned so much that the business case, when it was first mooted, was actually quite a weak one. There wasn't a great deal of value that you could get out of it. And now, with its eastern leg chopped off and potentially its head chopped off as well, and if we're just left with this rump of a railway that goes from West London, not central London, to north central Birmingham, who on earth is going to use it? And it's still going to have this massive, massive bill that Britain just can't afford at the moment.
But if the Manchester leg is scrapped and we're just left with London to Birmingham, that's a hugely expensive white elephant. It makes no sense, surely, to stop now.
Well, the whole thing is a white elephant, because, as I say, the business case was never a particularly strong one at all. And there were reports in the press over the last week that there's actually now analysis produced that shows HS2 in its current form, not what it might be if the Birmingham to Manchester bit is scrapped, in its current form, gives a 90p return for every pound spent. That is no way to treat taxpayers' money. And we would be far better scrapping the whole thing, which would still produce a pretty eye-watering amount of waste. A Labour peer, Tony Barclay, has worked out that we could get the loss down to about £8 billion. Now, that is a horrible amount of money to lose, but is it better to lose £8 billion than waste another 100 billion, 150 billion on finishing this thing that isn't really going to add any value?
Well, let's put that question to Professor Travers. What are your thoughts? Is it better to cut our losses now?
Well, I think the government's right to pause and look at the costs. I mean, one of the difficulties we've all had is that there is very little information in the public domain, in fact, about exactly what is being spent and at what rate. There are periodic reports to Parliament, but they're all in what are called 2019 prices, not real money, in fact. It's very hard to work out what is being spent in cash. There are no budgets each year. HS2's minutes of their meetings are redacted. It's very hard to work out. So I think what's gone on here is that the government has found itself realising that the costs are well above what was expected or indeed privately budgeted for, and are now within government, this is all going on within government, trying to decide what to do next.
But Professor Travers, aside from the money and the uncertainties about the actual sums, what about this whole issue of ending at Old Oak Common, way out in West London, rather than going to Euston? We know that that would save a lot of money, don't we?
It would, but as Greg Smith has rightly said, the project had a modest benefit to cost ratio if the whole thing was built. And the less of it that's built, though it looks as if the costs may not be far from the original estimate for the whole project, obviously the benefit to cost ratio gets worse. And without Euston, frankly, the benefits will almost certainly outweigh the costs will outweigh the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, Greg Smith, whenever there are huge infrastructure projects, be it the Elizabeth line, the Channel Tunnel, they always overrun in terms of time and money, but eventually people understand that the pain was worth it for the gain.
Well, I think the way we do infrastructure in this country is deeply flawed, that we tend to float a concept. The concept of HS2, really goes back a bit. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister when it was first mooted. We then had over a decade rowing about it. until there was a decision on the concept, and only then did we start to design it. And that's why we've ended up with these huge cost overruns and the estimates being way out of proportion to the reality. Because, of course, if you don't start designing it in detail until after an in-principle decision, well, that's when you find out that you can't go through certain areas, or you're going to create a sinkhole here, there, and everywhere, or whatever it might be that adds to those costs. I think with the Channel Tunnel, with Crossrail, actually with East West Rail, which is another railway being built through my constituency, there are clear benefits. There is a clear business case to all of those. HS2, as I said earlier, and Tony agreed, had a really, really poor business case, a poor cost ratio in the first place.
But not according to the Mayor of Manchester, not according to those people in the north who say that this is vital for levelling up.
Well, I'm on the Transport Select Committee, and we've been to the north of England, we've been to Leeds, we've been to Bradford, to take evidence directly from communities in the north. And I speak to colleagues who represent seats in the north of England all the time. And what I hear from them is that they need the improved east-west regional connectivity, better connectivity between towns, cities and villages in the north, not another very fast line to bring people south to London, and not even central London at that.
Yeah, is that right, Tony Travers? Would you agree with that we need more investment east to west, that this £100 billion or whatever it turns out to be would be far better spent improving the current infrastructure and regional connectivity?
Well, there's no doubt that regional connectivity matters, and Andy Burnham, the thing is that Andy Burnham and the other northern, and in fact, Andy Street, who is a Conservative mayor in Birmingham, I mean, they've been in favour of this project, but of course it's partly because it's this or nothing. And had there been a discussion rather earlier on about massive improvements to within city transport in Manchester, Leeds, Birmingham, and so on, and strengthening east-west links, that would have allowed a sort of more rational discussion about what the country needed. But the difficulty with where we've got to now is there are really no good ways out. Either if the project stops as a sort of shuttle from London to Birmingham, or just outside London to just outside central Birmingham, Curzon Street, it's not going to be, it will not be anything like what was originally intended. If it is decided to go on, or some way is found to not stop it altogether, then there's a risk, of course, that the costs will further escalate. And you must get back to the fact that those who are running the project, who are professionals, have to think long and hard about how they've allowed the costs to escalate in this way. Yeah. Ministers rely on them to, come up with the figures, and somehow the figures are not the ones that were expected, and indeed to some extent have been reported to Parliament.